our interpreters. You will notice there's a QR code which links to a video. Should you need more information, please wait till I recognize you by name before you speak. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, November 17th, 2025, the committee is meeting to study subject matter of Supplementary Estimates B 2025-2026, Vote 1B under Canadian Museum for Human Rights, Vote 1B under Canadian Museum of History, Vote 1B Canadian Museum of Immigration at Pier 21, Votes 1B and 5B under Canadian Museum of Nature, Vote 1B under Department of Canadian Heritage, Vote 1B under National Film Board, Vote 1B under National Gallery of Canada, Vote 1B under National Museum of Science and Technology, Vote 1B under Telefilm Canada, and Vote 1B under the National Battlefields Commission. And appearing with us this morning, we have the Honourable Marc Miller, Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, a minister responsible for official languages. Minister, you're here with us until 9:15, I understand. I will give you 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then I'll open the floor to members for questions. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, committee members. I want to acknowledge that we are here today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Really happy to be appearing before you. Comme ministre de l'Identité et de la Culture canadienne et
As Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture and Minister responsible for official languages, it is my job, above all else, to protect and promote who we are as Canadians. We face a rapidly changing world, a world that has presented and will continue to present many new and difficult challenges. It is up to us to show unity.
Canadians, to protect our cultural sovereignty and our ability to tell our own stories. To celebrate our languages, importantly, and to pass on a vibrant culture and heritage to the future generations. It's why our government is taking action to deliver investments where they're needed most. Investing in the arts and culture is a smart economic policy. Canada's arts and culture sector contributes over $130 billion to our economy, including $65 billion directly, and supports directly or indirectly more than 1 million jobs. Every federal dollar invested generates up to $29 in economic activity. Mais la valeur des arts et la culture va...
But the value of arts and culture goes, of course, far beyond the economy. In a world shaped more and more by disinformation, these investments seek to protect democratic values that are dear to us and to ensure Canadians have access to reliable information and recognize themselves in the stories they read, see, and hear. Our vast, diverse country is united by arts and culture, with local media and festivals we support every year. We build ties in communities.
That attending such arts and culture events deepens their connection to our country. So as part of the 2025-26 Supplementary Estimates B, Canadian Heritage received an additional $120.7 million in funding. The majority of this funding will go towards grants and contributions, enabling us to strengthen Canadian cultural institutions, sustain Canada's exceptional cultural scene, while also supporting both elite and grassroots sports. Il aura notamment une augmentation financée, du financement accordé au Fonds des médias.
There will be funding for the Canada Media Fund to better support the creation and production in Canada. This would extend the special measures for journalism and access to local media, so Canadians have access to reliable, timely information from diverse sources reflecting their community's needs and interests.
Will receive additional funding as well to advance the diversity and gender equality within the Canadian sports system. We're also investing more through Sport Integrity Canada, ensuring that athletes and coaches across the country can train and compete in safe and inclusive environments. In addition, we're funding arts and heritage activities that matter deeply to local communities, such as new exhibits for the Montreal Holocaust Museum, upgrades to cultural infrastructure like the Richmond Gateway Theatre in BC, and the Fallen Fighters Memorial Project in Whitby. Dans le cadre du budget supplémentaire des dépenses des organismes du portefeuille du patrimoine.
Supplementary estimates for Canadian heritage, portfolio organizations received increased funding totaling $29.9 million. This funding will support our national museums as well as the operational requirements of the National Battlefields Commission, the National Film Board, and Telefilm Canada.
The Canada Strong Pass for the summer of 2026. This initiative is a signature commitment of our government, helping families choose and discover Canada while reducing costs for families. This initiative was a great success last summer, in particular and during the holiday season, attracting 2 million visits in participating museums last summer. That includes 500,000 children who enjoyed free admission and 115,000 youth who benefited from discounted rates. In moments of change, what defines us matters more than ever. Canada's strength will come from our ability to tell our own stories with openness, honesty, and confidence. And by investing in our culture and choosing unity, we ensure that the story continues to be written by Canadians, for Canadians, and shared proudly with the world. Thank you for your attention. Je vous remercie de votre attention. Impatient de prendre.
Thank you for your attention. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Our witnesses from the department this morning. We also have Francis Bilodeau, Deputy Minister, Andrew Brown, Associate Deputy Minister, Véronique Côté, Chief Financial Officer, Blair McMurrin, Assistant Deputy Minister, Cultural Affairs, and Joël Momini, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister of Cultural Affairs. Welcome to all of you. I understand you're with us for the full 2 hours, and we appreciate your attendance. I'll now turn the floor over to Mrs. Thomas for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. My first question for you is, you recently made a statement after becoming minister that part of the responsibility of CBC is to foster what you called, quote, social cohesion. Can you explain for the committee what you meant by social cohesion? The reason I ask is because experienced journalists have stated that these words, this term, is often used by the People's Republic of China to mean state control and zero tolerance for challenges. That seems counter to the values that we hold here in Canada, and so I'm curious as to what you meant by social cohesion.
I think in an age that we're all living through of intense disinformation, there is less social cohesion as falsities are propagated through media sources, both legitimate and illegitimate, integral to a healthy democracy. Indeed, the fourth pillar of our democracy is a healthy media ecosystem that exercises rightly its freedom of expression. Again, integral to that is a state-financed public media that is the CBC or Radio-Canada, not state-controlled. Indeed, the CBC's mandate is one that is ferociously independent, and we should all defend that, whether they're saying good or bad things about us. So when there is a lack of support for a public broadcaster, I think that contributes to the spread of disinformation, and social cohesion is therefore affected. It's not about any sort of command and control of the media system that you may see in other countries, but indeed in part of an integral to a healthy democracy.
So what is social cohesion?
Social cohesion is the ability for people to trust their institutions, to not feel like society is falling apart, that we are all living together and able to exercise the rights, in the case of Canada, that define us, freedom as enshrined in the Charter of Rights. I mean, I could go on beyond the time allotted for you to discuss this, Ms. Thomas, but I think we both agree as to what it is.
Well, I think that the committee needed to hear from your mouth what it was. And one of the things that you said in your statement was that it's a trust in institutions, and that Canadians should be able to place their trust in the media. And in particular, you mentioned the public broadcaster, the CBC. Interestingly enough, just a couple of weeks ago, there was a media summit that was hosted in Vancouver. And at that media summit, the president of the Canadian Media Producers Association said from the stage, just before the Prime Minister took it, he said, quote, "Prime Minister, know that every person in this room and the 180,000 people who work in this industry have your back, just as we know you have ours." Minister, this is from a media organization in a room full of media folks directly to the Prime Minister saying, we have your back just as we know you have ours. Minister, that's not the role of the media. The role of the media is not to have the back of the Prime Minister and to be able to tell the story that the government wants told. The role of the media is to be truthful in storytelling, to report the news as Canadians deserve to have it told. When a statement like this is made, it chips away at the credibility of media, and it actually distorts the trust of Canadians that you just spoke about being important. What do you make of that?
Well, what I make of your statement, Ms. Thomas, is you're deeply incorrect in the premise that, first of all, the event itself took place in Ottawa. It was not members, it was in CTV, CBC. It was producers of shows. And those two executives, let's just correct the record.
Let's correct the record. It was news as well. In fact, the head of the CBC was one of the key speakers at this event.
What was said at the event, Ms. Thomas, from producers of shows like Heated Rivalry that was discussed at length, was that in the trade negotiations, these people that are defending Canadian content had the Prime Minister's back. It wasn't CBC or independent journalists.
Their job,
this.
with
So
all due
that's
respect,
false.
Minister, their job is to report on those trade negotiations. And so if you're reporting on those trade negotiations, you just simply report the facts. You don't have the Prime Minister's back.
The job of these people is
That's
to
an
make shows.
illegitimate use
like with
of
puppets.
media.
Like these are producers. They make shows. It's not. They don't. It wasn't.
Minister,
wasn't
you're
journalism.
misleading the committee. It was not just producers. That was
The
part
two
of it.
speakers were
But
head of an organization that talk about media producers.
these are folks who are receiving government dollars, who are producing material that is making it out to the Canadian public. They are telling stories. And they are telling the Prime Minister, we have your back just as you have ours.
They are telling the Prime Minister in the context of being under threat from U.S. content coming into Canada that they want to protect a pillar of our cultural identity, which is Canadian content. That's all they were saying.
They tell stories.
I think you're wrong, and I
Their
think
job
you know
is to
it.
tell stories. So how are they going to tell stories to protect the Prime Minister's back?
They want support financially to be able to tell stories about Canadian identity, whether it's good or bad about
But
the
they're
Prime
saying
Minister.
they also have the Prime Minister's back. So how are they going to have his back?
I think you're making this up. Like, I really think this
I
is something you're
think
looking for.
This
Something
is
where
a
there is
direct
not
quote from the
an issue.
individual who spoke
But
from
you're
the stage.
insinuating that it's journalists that are going to spin stories positively for the Prime Minister because they quote unquote have his back. That's entirely false. These are producers of shows like The Littlest Hobo, for God's sake.
I'll now turn the floor over to Mr. Al Sood for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to see you as always. And Minister, of course, a warm welcome to you. Thank you for being with us today. Given the relative recency of your appointment and that this is your first appearance, I'd like to give you the opportunity first and foremost to speak to your top priorities for Canadian heritage in 2026 and how this supplementary estimates reflects those.
Well, I think, as I mentioned, and thank you for the question, Mr. Al-Sood, I think in the context that we are all living where our Canadian identity is under threat, to make sure that the arts and cultural sector are well supported, as they have been in the past by the Canadian government. We can't and shouldn't be the funder of everything in the sector. There is a role of private industry in making sure that Canadian identity and the beauty that is this country is shown through the way we consume media that is in an ever-changing ecosystem. But the Canadian government has to be there. That includes funds for big shows, small shows, Arts of Canada Day celebrations that are so important in waving the flag, particularly in this context. So making, first and foremost, that the modest sums that we give from Heritage Canada to these organizations are well used to wave the flag, to show stories, good and bad, about who we are in this country. Also in the context where that important pillar of democracy being the media is under a constantly evolving ecosystem that we are adjusting to make sure that the traditional sources of information are well supported so that people are getting truthful information so that they can consume them and judge their politicians or judge society accordingly. That's part of what I meant in the question posed by your colleague about social cohesion. The future of the CBC Radio-Canada is extremely important, both in my role as the Minister of Heritage, Culture and Identity, but also as the Minister responsible for official languages because of the role that Radio-Canada plays in making sure information gets out into smaller Francophone communities in places principally outside Quebec. That's key. We also have, as I mentioned, as the ecosystem and the environment that we are in is evolving, the task of making sure that our kids are being protected from online harms and that we as a government play a role in making sure that those platforms are responsible. So I anticipate that will be a significant challenge for all members of Parliament, but particularly this committee over the next year.
Thank you, Minister. I've bragged about this directly to you before. Celebration Square is in my riding, very firmly in the middle. It's a beautiful opportunity for people to come together, celebrate the incredible diversity in our country. And in my community, cultural policy drives employment, it drives creative industry growth, tourism, small business development. I want to latch on to something you said early on, this idea of reflecting the beauty that is this country. Cultural policy is often both celebrated and at times scrutinized. And at a time when many Canadians are focused on affordability and fiscal responsibility, rightly so, there's heightened sensitivity around public spending. So how do you respond to concerns that cultural spending is disconnected from everyday realities, or that there are bigger concerns than, or bigger priorities than festivals at Celebration Square, for instance?
Well, it's a good question. You know, when the fundamental question any of us in this position needs to ask themselves, regardless of the role that they played, is what is the role of the state, what is the role of the federal government in any policy that it undertakes, including the funds that it provides to organizations and the many, for example, cultural organizations in your riding. That your Mississauga is so diverse, and it is a thriving, growing community that you are a proud representative of, and on the younger end of the spectrum, I've noticed. So there's a long future for people like you in politics, but we need to be able to nourish the mind, and that includes all the cultural organizations that you represent. That I could, if I had more time, I could fire off all the lists of things that Heritage Canada finances on both sides of this table. And it would be a pleasure to do it because those organizations are the heartbeat of this country. They, when you're funding an anti-racism strategy in Mississauga, you're raising awareness as to what the challenges are about diversity and inclusion. When you are funding a Blackfoot initiative, cultural initiative in Ms. Thomas's riding, you're raising awareness in and around the issues that the Blackfoot people face in and around the Lethbridge area. So those are small examples of the work that this does, that we do. And otherwise, if they didn't have funds from the Canadian government, they would struggle to have their voices heard. This is about people making their voices heard within their communities, and when we do it properly across the country.
That's a perfect segue to my hopefully short final question. Heritage Canada is uniquely positioned to create opportunities for young Canadians within the creative sector, whether that's someone who's looking to be the next David Miles or someone who's deeply passionate about video games at large. What role do you believe federal policy plays in supporting equitable access to these young Canadians, making sure that they have these opportunities in those sectors?
Yeah, and it's a challenge where young people, including my parliamentary secretary David Miles, who has a song that is well over 1 million listens on Spotify. I listened to it the other day. Not many of us can claim that type of fame, and shares the honor of having a Latin Grammy. He could probably talk to you at length about the struggles that he faced in making sure he could make ends meet, including getting financing. But I think when I've talked to David, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, particularly because he's here, he didn't expect handouts, right? He expected to work for the small sums that were provided from various levels of government. It's not just Heritage Canada that provides tax credits of various nature. Younger segments of the population have challenges, one, accessing these programs, knowing and being aware that they are there, particularly in an environment where things are ever changing. I spoke to a bunch of YouTubers that, given what they were doing, not everyone has access to government funds, nor should they, but they weren't aware, even though they were wildly successful, that they would have some funds available for them to even multiply those things, the earnings that they were making, and
Thank
that's
you,
actually good for the
Minister.
economy in the end.
Mr. Shampoo?
Mr. Shampoo, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for joining us, Minister, and officials as well. It's always a pleasure to have you. Minister, you're leaving for Paris. You're going to the UNESCO meeting next week. Last June, your predecessor, Minister Guilbeault, allowed the possibility of putting in place a protocol to support the 2005 UNESCO Convention on the Diversity of Cultural Expression, to have it put in place. Protocol to allow states to better legislate in the digital era. Can we expect you to support that proposal to move forward with a protocol that could be adopted at the 2027 meeting? To be very clear in my answer, this is a decision that is being taken currently, so I don't have the answer, the final answer for you this morning at 8:30. That being said, I'd like to highlight that during the last session, I spoke to Stephen, my predecessor. He did exceptional work to save the furniture. This is a protocol, a potential protocol that is not unanimously approved. And in this area, you'll agree, if we don't do things together, success will be incomplete. So I'm looking at this favorably. I've taken note of Mathieu Lacombe, my colleague's position, yes. I'm looking at it favorably, and I will support, I think, but our position is being finalized. Honestly, it's a week ahead of the event. Actually, it's next Wednesday. I can't conceive that you haven't had the opportunity to fully develop Canada's position on this. That would really surprise me that you were telling me the truth now by saying you don't have the answer. And the cultural industry is optimistic, yes. We spoke to them yesterday. A number of them are optimistic, but they're very nervous because this is an essential protocol to really protect cultural industries, especially in Quebec, but also in Europe, for example. Based on the information we're hearing, they're supporting this. So I think it'd be very reassuring if this morning you said, yes, we're going to support this protocol and we'll work on drafting it as quickly as possible so we can put it in place in 2027. That would please many people for you to commit a little bit more this morning, Minister Miller. I'd say this, there's reason to be optimistic in our position, in the position we'll take. I don't want this to be politicized. I want us to row in the same direction, but this is a potential protocol that is not universally approved. Far from that, and regardless of our position, there will be concerted work to be done with other member states so that it works. So the European Union is in favor, and if Canada is too, then there would be a pretty strong consensus. There would be a critical mass, legitimacy. Yes? Do you agree on that? Yes, but for now it's a hypothesis. Okay, well, no more next week and we can be optimistic. I think that may please people. What do you think of the advance, I would say, in how the situation is advancing in digital companies contributing to cultural industries? We've worked hard to put in place legislation. The CRTC regulates quickly or slowly, depending on its workload. Will we have something with the contribution of digital giants to our cultural ecosystem? Let's hope so. Unfortunately, this is an issue that was identified by the United States, for example, as a trade irritant. The reality is that the bills our government has put in place are very significant to have Canadian and Quebec content. I don't claim that it's perfect for now, far from it, but many companies are adjusting to meet those Canadian content criteria to have Canadian content. But in terms of the amounts, you know that they're subject to litigation. Do you not have the impression your government took off the digital services tax in the hopes that that would facilitate trade negotiations? It didn't amount to anything. We're facing somebody who's totally unpredictable. Wouldn't we have to stop classifying culture as a trade irritant, put our policies in place, stand up for them, and protect industries and jobs and our cultures? At a certain point, I'm a little fed up with hearing we have to be careful because it's sensitive for the Americans. The Americans aren't careful about what's sensitive to us. They're blocking us whenever they can. Shouldn't we say at a certain point, we'll do what we'll do, and they'll do what they're going to do? We'll protect our people, and we'll put in place the structures necessary, notably taxing digital giants who are making billions here, having them contribute to our system. Yes, we need to note that neither you nor I are around the negotiating table. I won't speak to the state of the negotiations because there needs to be public discretion. One of the reasons we've invested in the budget in arts and culture is to ensure these people are well supported. It's not as if we were hesitating, but the decision to suspend that tax was, as you know, from the Minister of Finance for reasons related to negotiations, which I can't speak to. Thank you.
The floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister. I've seen a lot of ministers come through this Heritage Department over the last 10 years, and Mr. Bilodeau, congratulations, moving up to the deputy spot. I'm going to talk about the missing Indigenous art because that's the last time I think department officials were in here. And I bring it up because actually yesterday I got a call from Cobourg, Ontario, kind of distressed about the way it was handled by the federal government, washing their hands. And I understand there was no legal obligation really to notify the artists of the disgraceful misplacement of the cultural contributions. But Minister, do you feel that there should be a moral obligation over this missing Indigenous art over the number of decades that we've had?
You know, thank you, Kevin. I do believe there's a moral obligation. Anytime you receive art or sacred items from Indigenous peoples, it is something that has to be treated with extra care. On the details of this, and I know you probably want to hear from me, but I would probably accord a few minutes to Andrew, who has a little more detail on it, if that's okay with everyone.
I can get you the second hour too, but very quickly, I just wondered if the department set up a public notice. You know, you kind of wash your hands. We're missing the art. It's under, you know, when we look at it, it's very minimal, $49,000. But how are we going to let the public know? Because it could be in an attic, it could be in a basement somewhere, and I think we have an obligation to the artists to let them know that we haven't washed our hands completely of the missing Indigenous art. Go ahead, Andrew.
So thank you for the question, and I would just say that certainly we need to respect the cultural value of this Indigenous art, irrespective of what it's how it may be assessed in terms of a monetary value. I believe that you're making reference to the audit of Indigenous art that was conducted, and I believe, in fact, led by Indigenous Services Canada. So I think just on that. That it's work that continues in terms of that accounting and being able to track down those pieces of Indigenous cultural property. So
I didn't get that feeling, Andrew. I got the feeling the study was done. We can't find. We've decided that the art is gone. We're washing our hands and we're moving on. So, I mean, that was the report that I saw. They can't find the art. They don't know where it is. They don't really care anymore, and we're moving on from it. So that was my interpretation, but we'll move on from this. I was just wondering what the department will do in the future now that this doesn't happen again, because it was an embarrassment. You know, I put up a Facebook post on it, and I didn't think I'd get any reaction, and I was shocked, because Indigenous art, as I said in the statement here months ago, the value of Indigenous art has gone through the roof. And if someone's going to donate, or if someone's going to give us a piece and we lose it, I feel for the family, I feel for the artist, and I was kind of awestruck by the department saying, I'm sorry, it's only worth 49,000 under. We're not really going to worry about this, and we're moving on. So anyways, I'm going to move on with my questioning. I only have another minute here. The job cuts at the two museums, Minister, the Canadian Museum of History and the War Museum. Your thoughts on it? They took a big bullet here, both of them. They slashed their workforce, 18%. You know, those are pretty big. 18 and 24% are the reduction of the two museums. Why?
You know, as with any government agency, the civil service as well is going through a rationalization process headed by central agencies related to the reduction of the workforce in particular and cost savings. So these are decisions that were taken. I make no excuses for them, but they are part of this. They're part of this process.
And then on the supplementary estimates, I see, I mean, over $11 million is going to go. You've added some money to the Museums of Human Rights, History, Immigration, Pier 21, the Museum of Nature, and the Gallery of Canada. So you're taking away from the two museums that I mentioned, and now on the supplementary estimates, you've come around and said, here's more money. So can you explain those two?
Look, you can do two things at once. In any restructuring, you do have cuts in one area and investments in others. No one would propose to cut the Saskatchewan Indigenous Cultural Centre that we put $11 million into your riding as part of this simply to satisfy an arithmetic calculation. I think that's a cultural centre that was super important to your riding, but I don't think you would propose to cut it just simply because it was a number.
Thank you. Mrs. Royer, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm really delighted, Minister Miller, that you are in the role, and I'm looking forward to hearing about the great things that the department is going to be doing. In my riding of Port Moody Coquitlam, community and ethnic television, such as the Tri-Cities TV and Parvaz and Korean television through Omnivision, are vital local voices. They survive mainly because of grassroots, volunteer-driven efforts stepping in when traditional systems have pulled back. But they really rely on the large broadcasters to decide whether they are carried at all and how much support they receive. How concerned are you about their sustainability, and what role can the federal government play in making sure that this system is more accessible for them?
You know, these organizations, like many around the country, are struggling for a variety of reasons. They struggle generally because a lot of them are grassroots. Some are even just shoestring operations that get out amazing information into the community, often cultural communities that are looking for that information, where they want to hear about issues that they care about and want to see themselves in the journalism and the journalists that provide that information. So it is of concern to me that they can survive and thrive. Again, this is a context where the federal government can't always do everything, but we must do something. A couple elements I think would be important for you to note, and the organizations that serve the members of Port Moody Coquitlam so faithfully. The Changing Narratives Fund, which was a $10 million investment over 3 years that supports diverse voices in Canadian media. So Indigenous, Black, racialized, ethno-religious minorities. to share stories and experiences. So there's eligibility there. That's part of the Canadian Media Fund that supports diverse communities generally as well. So there are a number of streams, including, in addition, the local journalism initiative that supports communities through press, radio, and community television. It's delivered not by me, but by a not-for-profit organization, so that it does what people are concerned about, protecting the independence of the press. I don't have discretion over it, so to speak. And that contributes, for example, for the news, but also hiring diverse journalists.
Thank you for the answer. I also want to speak a little bit about Freshet News. It's a new publication in our community. We lost the much respected, deeply trusted Tri-City News. They were in operation for many years in our community. They closed their doors, their print media and their digital media, just ahead of the election. But the journalists that had 20 and 30 years of experience recreated Freshet News. But they are also facing many challenges. But that's actually not my question. Just wanted to give a bit of a shout out. CPAC is essential to parliamentary transparency. And
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt, Ms. Royer. I think we have a problem with interpretation.
Okay.
Did I understand
All
that
right.
correctly? We just need to suspend for a couple of minutes
Okay.
while we resolve that problem. Okay, with another couple of minutes left.
Thank you, Madam Chair. CPAC is essential to parliamentary transparency. And when viewership is strong, for registered wholesale subscriber fees, they have not kept pace with rising costs, limiting its ability to modernize aging broadcasting infrastructure. How is your department thinking about long-term sustainability for public interest broadcasters like the much relied upon CPAC? And can you talk about the access to parliament? Can you make sure that access to parliamentary democracy keeps pace with how Canadians actually consume our media? Thank you.
I think the work. Thank you, Ms. Roy. The work that CPAC does is indispensable because it covers stuff that even the most ardent journalists outlets don't cover, and some of it is like watching paint dry. But I think it is important. What's that? Like much like my answer currently, but we're doing a couple of things. We are waiting for a CRTC decision that would create a sequence of waterfall events that would see CPAC get a proper support that it deserves. So that is important. In the meantime, we've invested in, we're bridging them in a number of ways, including recently an investment of about $5 million over the next 3 years for CPAC to continue. I will not hide from you that is not all that they want, but those are ongoing discussions in order to make sure that we are supporting the proper broadcast of all parliamentary activities.
Thank you. I'm really glad that you're having those discussions. Thank you, Minister. See.
All right, moving to Monsieur Champoux pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. We've been consulted by independent TV stations in news and in the regions for the local news fund. Last June, if I'm not mistaken, the CRTC authorized Chorus to join that fund. Chorus is eligible because of its global TV stations, and that was a reasonable decision to admit Chorus to the groups of beneficiaries of that fund. The arrival of Chorus means that a large share of that fund is taken up by Chorus to the detriment of the other players, which are all smaller regional players that cover areas like Abitibi. And then in eastern Quebec, there's an independent station that broadcasts CVA. So those stations urgently need that fund to survive, to maintain their newsrooms, to keep them open. The money that was supposed to go into that fund was supposed to come from digital companies, but that's slow in coming, and the stations are at risk of closing. The Association for those stations asks the government to provide support, I think $3 or $3.5 million a month, until money from digital companies comes to make up the shortfall for those companies. This is a matter of survival. This is for local news. Is your government going to do something to save them soon? That's a good question, Mr. Champoux. I don't have a perfect answer for you once again. You've identified very clearly we are awaiting the funds from the digital platforms. And of course, there's more demand with Chorus in the group. This is something to keep an eye on. I'm not insensitive, far from it, to this issue, but I don't have a resolution. The solution has been proposed. I think it would be easy. It wouldn't be very costly as we wait. Time is of the essence. We can't say we'll look at this later. There are stations that are about to close because they don't have the funds, and those amounts would save them. This is about local journalism, which is already weakened by digital companies. It's really in serious jeopardy now. It's not the only issue, but this one would be easy to solve pretty quickly while we await funding from digital companies. I think you could put some pressure on this and convince your Minister of Finance to free up some funds. Well, you know his level of energy very well. Yeah, we're working on this. You've identified it. It's not necessarily just our department. There are different solutions, but we don't have a resolution yet. Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Généreux for 5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister Miller, for joining us. I'll echo my colleague. We've all been contacted about this. When you talk about social cohesion, national social cohesion is important, and so is regional social cohesion. And in our areas, small TV stations or even radio stations and newspapers as well, they all need help. They're suffering a lot, and many of them are on death's doorstep. And the solution proposed, because of course C11, C18 didn't deliver what they were supposed to deliver. We need to be clear on that. The funds and the agreement with Google, where there's $100 million for all media. From that amount, $7 million goes to Radio-Canada, and $120 million in your latest budget goes to CBC Radio-Canada. Why is that $7 million still going to Radio-Canada if it's the case? Simply because they're entitled to it, just as the others are. It's a decision on your part to decide if in an agreement with the Government of Canada and Google where the money goes. Now, I get back to your explanation of social cohesion. CBC Radio-Canada, you just gave them $120 million. That's a right you have. You promised that for the election. But how is it that in an agreement with Google, and our regional media are the most penalized now? It's not Radio-Canada, that is. Radio-Canada is 100% subsidized by the public. Regional companies are often private and small. They need that support. I don't understand why there's still $7 million going to Radio-Canada when you just gave them $120 million. I don't want to lack respect. This is money that's distributed based on the number of journalists. There was a cap put in place, so that's the reality, that CBC Radio-Canada was entitled to these funds. Of course, the state can't do everything, and everybody is suffering, so we need to make choices. And you know as much as I do, because these people spoke to you as well. They want money, yes, but also tax credits that would apply to them. Once again, this is something we are working on. We'll start a study in a few weeks on media. What we'll hear and what you'll hear as well from Canadian media doesn't paint a pretty picture. The pre-meetings we've had with the people who come to see us because of this study, the list of witnesses just keeps getting longer because the media system in Canada is really in jeopardy. And sincerely, do you believe, if I remember correctly from what was done ahead of C11 and C18, is that there would be about $300 million that would be brought in and redistributed in the media universe in Canada and Quebec. Do you think those bills have done what they promised to do? They didn't meet their obligations. Well, it's not a full success. People are adjusting to the reality of C11 and C18. That includes the litigation in place. The amounts are north of $300 million. That's close to $1 billion if it were to succeed. That's not nothing. You're aware that they're contesting a portion currently, so it's not possible to give the money to regional media through the media fund. They have nearly infinite funds. They could drag this out for years and years before the courts and contesting the law. So what do we do while we wait? What does the government do what will it do to support dying local media? Once again, social cohesion is essential, not just at the national level, but at the regional level as well, in the use and presence of media in our regions. If tomorrow morning 50% of regional media disappear, and there are just 2 or 3 sources of information, I don't think we can talk about national cohesion. I agree with you. We are trying to address this. We don't have $800 million, but within your party, your colleague on your right thinks that social cohesion is a state conspiracy, not Mr. Waugh, the other colleague. There is a lack of consistency in your party on the use of that word. Thank you. Next, Mr. Tumba. 5 minutes. Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you, Minister, for joining us. Earlier, I saw good news in La Presse. It's very important, so I'll speak to it. Canada is 3rd in the world in trust among citizens, after Sweden and the Netherlands, with 73%. Canadian Heritage is a stakeholder with the Canada Strong Pass. How would you comment on that, Minister? Could you repeat your question, please? I'd like to have your comments on Canada being in 3rd place for social trust among citizens. I think it bodes very well, but we are in an ecosystem where there's little trust in some institutions, especially with young people. So yes, it's important. It's important to me to be proud of that victory because there's national unity and social cohesion. But as your colleague, Mr. Généreux, said, that doesn't mean there aren't regional issues that would risk that social cohesion. We need to work together to make sure we're all together, especially with the threat with our so-called friend to the south threatening us with all sorts of things like a bridge. So we need to keep an eye on this. For young people, I think it was very important to have that Canada Strong Pass to encourage them to visit museums and national parks and to ensure confidence. It's a national treasure to have these huge spaces we can visit. Very few people visit them, unfortunately. But we wanted to give them a little boost to go to the museum. There's the Space and Aviation Museum in Ottawa, and there's the big parks. I think it's the right thing to do. I know we need to keep an eye on the use of public funds, but I think it's a very good investment. Thank you, Minister. Now another topic. I've often talked about the World Cup coming up, our country will be on the map. Many people will visit. How is Canadian Heritage preparing for the World Cup? And you know very well, I think there's the standard bearer of the Canadian flag twice, Mr. Van Coverden, who's at the Olympics now. He's our Secretary of State for Sports, which is technically under Canadian Heritage. He's working on this. He's in Milan celebrating our Canadian athletes. We're still waiting for a gold medal, but I'm sure that's coming. Regarding FIFA, it's a golden opportunity to shine internationally. Whether it's the diversity of our Canadian team, made up of many new Canadians, or the fact that we're welcoming people here and we can show Canada to the world. We'll have a number of matches which are quite expensive. I saw the price of tickets the other day, and unfortunately, not everybody could afford that. But it's a golden opportunity to really have Canada shine around the world. Yes, absolutely. And we're investing money. I'm forgetting the important part. We're investing millions. How much? $220 million from our department in particular, but also other departments are very closely involved. Thank you, Minister. In my writing, Mont Bruno Acadie, there are a number of cultural organizations that play an important role in local life. What actions can your department take to make access to programs simpler and reduce bureaucracy so small companies can benefit from support from your department? That's always a concern. I look forward to visiting your writing once again. But in a context where the department distributes small amounts often to small organizations, this is an immensely important point because those people don't necessarily have administration. These are people who often work part-time. They don't always have the means to apply for funds, and that's the case everywhere. But especially in small areas, there are organizations like in Montreal. I'm glad organizations receive the funds, but they have more of a capacity to apply for funds. So we're always looking at that. So there's equity in the country, and thank you for highlighting that. Thank you, Minister. I know it's the time where you were supposed to leave, but because we lost a few minutes with the technical problems, could you stay a few extra minutes or not? You know, that's the worst question to ask a minister. We'll ask the officials. 4 minutes.
Un rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente.
Point of order, Madam Chair. The minister said he was staying for 4 minutes, and you're going to start another round that won't be equitable for the parties. I think either we ask for a few more minutes so we can all have 2.5, 3 minutes. Could those 4 minutes, is it really 4 minutes, or could we push that a little bit?
5, 6, 6.
Thank you.
5 or 6? Okay. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. Does that work? Well, 2, 2, 2.
Have how much?
2.
2 minutes. Okay. Minister, thanks for being here. Thanks for. Have you seen this report? It's by Honest Reporting Canada, and it has some very disconcerting findings about CBC. Basically, that what this did, it used AI to examine CBC's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. It analyzed 2,789 CBC news articles published between October 7th, 2023, the day of that terrible massacre, and June 7th, 2025. And it found that CBC's coverage of the war demonstrated significant imbalance, and there is consistent, overwhelming bias against Israel. So I'm wondering, Mr. Minister, does it concern you that public dollars are being sent from your department to CBC, and this report calls into question its very, very impartiality and actually questions its stated journalistic standards and practices?
I'll say a couple things, and I don't presume that my answer will make you happy, Mr. Diot. First and foremost, the CBC, as you know, is independent. It doesn't mean that it is unaccountable and that I am not entitled to an opinion on this matter. But I think I want to be very judicious in my answer, in particular because of the ongoing situation in Gaza, but also because the CBC itself has its own mechanism internally. Ultimately, the CBC is accounted to the public, and it's important not to attach that type of condition to financing of the public.
Okay,
supported
that's
broadcast.
fair enough. But you know, their own editorial culture is being questioned. And actually, this report from Honest Reporting Canada is saying that they're calling for an audit of CBC's editorial culture.
Thank you, Mr. Diot. That's exactly 2 minutes. And Monsieur Chumba pour 2 minutes. Exactement.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, I know it's easy to talk about incredible success, but there's a study of the value of Canadian content with heated rivalry and intellectual property. How can the government continue promoting Canadian identity and values that can echo in Canada and around the world? I think it's important to note that shows like Heated Rivalry should not be the exception to the rule. They should be the rule. It's an example. Well, there are a lot of Francophone references in Heated Rivalry, but it's not a Francophone show. I encourage everyone to watch Empathie, which has great ratings. It's a Canadian production. Without interfering too much, I think we need to embrace the risk that those shows take and really trust the producer's instincts.
Il me reste quelques secondes, je peux ajouter?
I have a few seconds left. To conclude, Minister, I want to pick up on a point on digital platforms that are big players here in Canada. What concrete measures can your department put in place to ensure that Canadian content is better highlighted so that creators from Canada, from underrepresented communities, can reach their audience and benefit socially and economically? Yes, I think we need to have trust in an institution like the CRTC, which manages and regulates Canadian content. It's very important. And without getting into discussions on digital platforms and discussions that are being held between us and our economic partner, the United States, we always want to have culture as a red line in those discussions. Great. Thank you. Mr. Shampoo, 1 minute. 2 minutes, you said. We said 2. We agreed on 2. Go ahead. You can take much more than 2 minutes because it's the last round, Mr. Minister. You probably heard about the report that was on Enquête last week on Live Nation, which in the United States is often accused of having a monopoly in selling tickets for shows. We know they own Eventco here, which produces shows, but we know there's an issue. There's a big multinational American company with Ticketmaster and Live Nation. There's a big impact on festivals and shows, not only in Montreal, but in the whole festival industry. Do you have comments on this? Because it's extremely concerning to see that small halls, which are trying to succeed with festivals in Montreal, are in very precarious situations because of the rules that those big companies put in place. They're dominant players. Yes, that is concerning to me. Any monopolistic practice concerns me and should concern all politicians. In my role, and I've looked very quickly, I think this institution, their relationship with Eventco, they receive about 1% of funds allocated in this area. It's not huge, but it's something. It's not an excuse either. The reality is that I'm more concerned about the artists than the producers. And as you know, this is an organization that produces Osheaga, Jazz Fest, big shows. But in any analysis at the department, we need to keep an eye on artists, especially those who are potentially exploited. Yes, of course, but 80% of shows are in halls that belong to Evenco and by extension Live Nation. These are generally foreign artists. They don't really feature local artists, and that should be of concern. We should ensure that concern shows in the way we allocate funds to support with subsidies in those activities. Do you not agree? I do agree. As I said earlier, we always need to ask where and how will the state take action, especially when there's a quasi-monopoly. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. We'll give you a few minutes to leave, but we appreciate your presence here today.
Gets out of the room.